What's up, Fairlawn Ambulance Corps? Welcome back to another episode number 19. Do lights and sirens save lives? I'm John Barr. Let's get into it. As usual, take a look, read the usual disclaimer. All right, with that, let's get into it. So, what's the fundamental question here? Do lights and sirens save lives? And the answer is no, at least mostly no. So, for those of you who wanted the bottom line, there you have it. You can sign off now. The rest of you who want to know why, stay tuned. So what I'm going to go over today is a joint statement on the use of lights and sirens in vehicle operations. Now, this was put out by the National Association of EMS Physicians. That's a professional organization for physicians who specialize in EMS. And this summarizes all the available literature as well as gets input from multiple specialty organizations that have stakes in the use of lights and sirens. And so I've included a citation to the position statement at the end. You feel free to take a look at that, and that'll give you all the sources from which I pulled all the stats and other things you'll see in this lecture. But I think most of you want the bottom line and what it means to you, so that's what I'm here to translate for you. So we're going to look to answer three questions. What are the risks of lights and sirens? What are the benefits of lights and sirens? And then how can we use lights and sirens the most safely? So first, we need to talk about the risks. Unfortunately, scenes like what you see here are way too common. Many of you have either been in a scene, know someone who's been in a scene, or have heard about a scene like this where an ambulance is involved in a major accident. And it's unfortunately pretty common. So if we look at the numbers based on different studies, in 2009, there were over 1,500 ambulance crashes. In 96 to 2012, there were at least 64 civilian fatalities and 217 injuries. Between 93 and 2010, 97 EMS providers died as a result of traffic fatality accidents. And if we look at the traffic fatality rates for police, fire, and EMS, compared to the national average in all occupations, we are 2.5 to 4.8 times more likely to die in a motor vehicle accident than the national average, and that is way too high. I love doing EMS, but I don't want to die doing it, and I don't think you do either. So we really need to address this issue. Just by turning on your lights and sirens, you are increasing the chance of an EMS vehicle crash by up to 50%. And it almost triples that chance while you're transporting a patient, and it's just way too high. Now you may say, okay, well, it's not just the crash involving the providers on the ambulance and the passengers in the other car you crash into. It's actually even worse because for every crash involving an ambulance, there are 4 wake effect collisions, meaning vehicles trying to get out of the way of you or doing things in response to you driving lights and sirens then get into secondary crashes, and these are called wake effect collisions. And for every ambulance crash or every emergency vehicle crash, there's 4 of these. So the effect really gets magnified and it's quite dangerous. So, okay, well, lights and sirens are so dangerous, we should stop using them, right? Well, still, in spite of this, about 74% of EMS responses still use lights and sirens, including 21.6% of EMS transports. Now, I don't know if things have subsequently changed, but when I was riding actively at the Fairlawn Volunteer Ambulance Corps, we were responding to essentially all of our calls using lights and sirens. That may have since changed, but it's something to consider, and I hope that this presentation and the links to the position statement will help get us to calls more safely and get patients to the hospital more safely. Okay, so that's the bad, but you might say, John, okay, well, but maybe we're saving a lot of lives and therefore the risk we take by using lights and sirens is worth it. Well, is it worth it? Let's find out. So if we look at, the idea behind lights and sirens is you'll save time and get to the scene faster. And if you save time and you get there faster, you can do life-saving interventions, which will save lives. Well, if we look at the data, the average time saved for a lights and sirens response or transport is only between 42 seconds and 3.8 minutes. 42 seconds to 3.8 minutes. It's really not that much. And you may say, well, does that matter? Mostly not. Okay, so we subsequently looked at studies and said, well, okay, were life-saving interventions performed on those scenes with lights and sirens? And it turns out yes, but only 6.9% of the time. Only 6.9% of the time, which means the vast majority of the time, a time-sensitive intervention such as defibrillation, as you see here, was not done. Most of the time, there's not a time-saving intervention. Most of the time there is not a time-sensitive life-saving intervention. And so with that, we have room to improve. And so you might say, well, okay, John, I get it. How can I identify ahead of time the patients who need a time-saving, life-saving intervention and know how to respond? So the way to do that, or one way to do that, is through emergency medical dispatch protocols, or EMD programs. Now, this is an example of one of them, which uses the Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta system, right? And as you can see based on this chart, Alpha is a BLS response but cold, Bravo is a BLS response but hot, Charlie is an ALS response but cold, and Delta is an ALS response but hot, with Echo being closest available unit, and Omega are sort of alternate or lower priority calls. And so you can take a look at this in more detail. There are other ways to do this. Some EMS systems use a class system, a class 1, 2, 3, 4. The point I hope to give to you here is that using an emergency medical dispatch system to help identify the calls that really require lights and sirens can reduce use of lights and sirens and reduce risk to yourself and to the general public. And so I encourage you to take a look at an EMD protocol. So you may be wondering, well, okay, has anyone else done this before? Did it work? And it turns out, yes, that priority EMS agencies who've used an evidence-based QA program have been able to reduce their use of lights and sirens to about 20 to 33%. Remember, we were previously at 74%, and they didn't have any adverse outcomes really from doing that. And I think that speaks to the data which say that, we're only doing a time-sensitive life-saving intervention 6.9% of the time. So most of the time, we can respond without lights and sirens perfectly fine, and that makes it much safer for you, for the patient, and for the public. Now, what else can we do? The other thing we can do is have good driver training. So this is your EVOC, or Emergency Vehicle Operator course, or your CEVO, Coaching the Emergency Vehicle Operator. It's really important to stay up to date on this, to do driver training, and to pay attention in those classes, because that's also, if we are going to drive lights and sirens, that's how we're going to do it in the safest way possible. Okay, so I've told you lights and sirens are dangerous, that there's only a few select cases where we're really doing a life-saving intervention. Emergency medical dispatch protocols can identify that. Great, you're ready to do that. But there's one other issue, and that's the general public. So I'm going to tell you guys a story of something that actually happened to me when I was responding as an EMS physician to a call. The medical details of the call are not that important. Suffice it to say, I responded to the call. We were taking care of the patient. The patient was receiving pre-hospital physician level of care, so very advanced care, very good care. And we were a very short distance from the hospital, less than 10 minutes. And so we drove without lights and sirens to the hospital. Okay. This patient's, in this particular case, the family member saw the ambulance, was trying to follow to the hospital, saw they were not driving lights and sirens, pulled up in front of the ambulance and very aggressively blocked the ambulance and started to get into a fight with the ambulance driver, because this particular individual was under the impression that we were not taking their family members seriously because we were not driving with lights and sirens. And so what I'm telling you is, if you're going to implement a program of emergency medical dispatch and work on reducing the use of lights and sirens, it's important to educate the community and the public on the data, on the rationale for the program, explain how it does actually protect the public by reducing use of lights and sirens, because people may view it as you're not taking it seriously, or you not not using all the effort in pulling out all the stops for their family member. And so the public needs to be aware of this and understand this to avoid these types of incidences, which could be quite dangerous, right? And luckily we were able to de-escalate our situation, but it just goes to show that the public perception of these type of programs matters in order for them to be successful. So let's summarize. What I've told you today is this: lights and sirens significantly increase the risk to yourself, to your crew, to the patient, and the general public. And for all that risk, all we get is a few minutes at most in saved time, and in most cases, this is clinically insignificant. However, for those few cases where it does matter, use of emergency medical dispatch protocols can help identify those calls. The other thing we can do is, well, for the times we do need to drive lights and sirens, having good driver training through EVOC or CVO programs is really important. And lastly, remember how the public sees you. For any program structured to improve care by reducing use of lights and sirens, community education is really important, and the community needs to understand what you're doing. So with that said, I hope you learned something. Remember that only you can prevent excessive lights and sirens use. Thank you guys again. Stay safe out there. Here's the references and a link to that position statement I referred to. John Barr out.